Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Simon Atkinson toku ingoa. I am Simon Atkinson. I am currently the president of FLANZ, working as an independent consultant. As Christina said, it's really intended to be as interactive presentation as possible. So you can tweet, you can certainly join us at the end if you're not already a member of either of our two sister organisations, FLANZ here in New Zealand and ODLA in Australia. Please do so, do join, do participate. The way we're going to try and get you to participate through this session is using Mentimeter. I don't plan to present the substance of the report, which is one of the reasons why Christina's already provided links in the chat. I'm sure she'll do that again shortly for those of you that arrived a little bit later. I was anticipating that you would have had the opportunity to look at the report, and if not, the brief review of the document itself. I'm not going to go through it in any great detail. The purpose of this session is to elicit from you some of your input, some of your insights. It's a workshop, not a webinar. And the intention is for us to try and work out whether there are any specific directions for us as FLANZ and ODLA that we might want to engage with the wider community. So I think it's really important that you do participate. The technology to enable you to do that, as Christina said, would be ideally you would either have a separate web browser, or better still, I think if you use your mobile phone. I'm slightly nervous now because something's just popped up to say my internet is unstable, but that's why we have co-hosts, right? So we're going to set up themes briefly. Then there'll be a prioritization activity, which is for you to individually think about some of these individual innovative pedagogies, or just to give you a sense of whether you think it might work in your practice. Then there will be a breakout activity. We'll leave time to do that for you to work with colleagues in your relative sector, just to work out, again, just to discuss amongst yourselves whether there's one that emerges as a key innovation or innovative practice that you might want to engage with. And then we're going to come back and do some more sort of collective insights, if you like, around what the future actions might be. So hopefully that's relatively clear. The way you do this is using these tools, Mentimeter. The next slide is going to give you the code that you need to log in. Just remember, if you're working on a mobile phone, it won't automatically record your response until you submit. So that at the bottom of each of those screens, if you're on a separate web browser or on a phone, there is a button at the top that says submit. You must press that in order to register your response. So I would, whoops. Please either use your phone to scan that QR code, which will take you straight to menti.com, or type menti.com into your browser and then put that code in. Once you've done that, don't worry, those details will stay at the top of the screens. Then it's not going to disappear. Once you've done that, I would like you to just start by answering this first question, which is literally, where are you from? I'm going to do it too. That's the only way I can be 100% sure that it's working, but it looks as though people are responding already, so that's great. We currently have 22 people, apparently. I'm not going to count. You won't be guilted if you don't participate, nor are your responses being attributed to you individually. So this is completely independent of what's going on in Zoom. It's essentially, therefore, completely anonymous. So we've got two colleagues joining us from Australia. Very well represented here in the Wellington region, Auckland. Great, so fantastic, thanks. Nice to know where you come from. Just to to remind you, at the end of the session, you will be able to download all of the results from the Mentimeter using the tool that you're logged onto. So at the end, it will ask you, do you want to receive the results? That's the only point at which you will need to enter any personal identification. So let's look at, how do you think about your approach to new educational technologies? Are you nervous about them? Do you think you're a bit pedestrian, that you'll just enhance what you're doing? Are you progressive? Do you like to incorporate new things? Or do you see yourself as somewhat radical? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about that. Okay, so it's got 16 out of the 22 people. If you are struggling to get into the technology itself, don't worry, you will still be able to participate. But I think it's really good if you do try and access the technology, either a separate web browser window or your phone. Your phone's probably the best option, I suggest. Okay, so what sector do you work in? Are you universities, polytechnics, private training enterprises, formal secondary sector, formal school sector, or commercial learning development? That's interesting, very overrepresentative in the university space, which is to be expected, but in some ways slightly disappointing from a FLANZ perspective, because we do really want to reach out to particularly the school sector and the private training organizations as best we can. So hopefully we'll be able to spread the good word. Great, that's really interesting, thank you. And you can see that this is also breaking down those results from the previous poll by your confidence measures as well. So that's a really interesting insight to have. Thank you. So the next question, this is the big one. Have you actually read the report or the summary? It's okay if you haven't. Like I say, it's not. It will be slightly difficult for you to participate fully in some of the conversations if you haven't read it. I'm not going to go in any great detail, just to remind you, but I do think it's important to just get a sense of what the report might contain. Okay, so we've got 18 people have responded. I had 19 the last time round, so someone's obviously decided they haven't read it, or they can't read it, or they're desperately trying to read it as we speak, maybe, I don't know. Okay, thank you for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to switch then to very much an overview of this report. I'm not going to go into any great detail. It's an interesting read. I think it's quite conservative in some ways. I think it isn't actually as innovative as one might expect. When you think about the way the Horizon reports that come out from the US, the New Media Corporation and NMC produce the Horizon report. It's sometimes quite radical, quite futuristic. These are fairly pedestrian kind of innovations in a way. They're almost relabeling or repackaging of a lot of existing practice, and they don't pretend to be particularly, I shouldn't really call it innovative pedagogies, because it's about innovating pedagogy. So the expectation is that people are already doing some of these things. So we've got hybrid models, the idea of open or flexible, different hybrid models just to maximize learning. That's something that's very much came about to prominence through COVID, obviously, because people were starting to work how to work with remote learners for the first time in some instances. We've got dual learning scenarios, which really is a rebranding of sort of work-based or work-related learning. Some slightly variations on that. Micro-credentials, I think, is fairly well established. There's not a lot of innovation within that space, but it is innovative for a lot of institutions. The pedagogy of autonomy, I think, is very much really about trying to enforce the kind of human-centered notion of learning and to make sure that learners have freedom of choice. So the whole flexible message kind of comes across quite strongly under the pedagogy of autonomy. Watch parties, I'm going to come to a little bit later, but it's certainly, again, something that was born or sort of reinforced through COVID, when people were sharing videos and thinking about how they would get students to reflect around those. And so doing it synchronously through all the modern technologies that we now have does sometimes elicit more engagement. And so we'll come back to that in a moment. Influencer-led education is very much the TikTok phenomena. I certainly have learned a huge amount about Ukraine by watching people on TikTok. I didn't set out to learn about Ukraine, but I have done, and arguably some of those people are sort of setting themselves up as educators within their specialist field. Pedagogies of the home, again, very much a result of the COVID crisis, was realizing that the home itself is a space of cultural learning and leveraging a lot of cultural support, so using Farnell to enforce learning practices. Pedagogy of discomfort is not particularly radical, I don't think. It's very much Mesereau's transformative learning. It's really about realizing that there's a lot of affective learning that goes on, making students uncomfortable with what they know and don't know, and then trying to use that as a basis for future learning. Well-being education is very much the mindfulness kind of movement that's happened in the last 10 years or so. And then walk and talk, which is derived largely from more recent studies, neuroscience, around being active while learning, active learning while you're standing up, learning while you're moving around. So these 10 innovations are very often embedded within existing programs and course designs to a different degree, to different degrees, and in different forms. And what I'd like you to do as we go through the feedback in a moment is for you to just think about whether or not you can use some of these approaches in your own designs, in your own practice, and if so, how hard that's going to be. We're going to come to that in just a minute. I've broken these down into 4 categories quite deliberately. I've associated labels with each of these. They're my labels. This has nothing to do with the original report produced by the Open University in the UK. It is very much my labeling. I've grouped them together into what I regard as context-aware curriculum designs for those first 3, skills-orientated curriculum design for dual learning scenarios and pedagogies of micro-credentials, leveraging non-formal and informal learning, which I think is a really fascinating area for me personally, and I think it has huge opportunities for us to be thinking about how we recognize our own deficiencies as institutions for formal learning, and then human-centered learning designs, which again are more around thinking about the individual experience of the learner. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is I want you to be thinking about some of the ways in which you yourself might want to think about whether or not these individual innovations are meaningful to you and how you might work with them. So what I'm going to do is, you should find that if you've been logged on to your device, it should be automatically moving you to the right page. If not, it will tell you that you have the option to find the current slide. So hopefully that'll be fairly intuitive. You should now be able to see on your screens your own input for this particular question. And what we're looking at here is the relative effort and impact. By impact, what we mean is the impact in terms of the quality of the learning experience. How much impact is this actually going to have in terms of benefit to the learner? And the effort is how hard it would be for you or your institution to incorporate some of these designs. So I'm going to give you a little while to do this first one, just to make sure people do understand that the technology is working its own way. So give you a minute and see if you can have a little think on an individual basis. Where do you think these particular innovations would fit. If you want to use your microphone because you have a question, I think you can put your hand up and we can answer it. If that's not clear what it is I'm asking you to do, by all means, interrupt me and ask. You'll see the dots are being moved around in accordance with your individual responses. So all of your responses are not appearing, and we don't have all 11 of you producing, or 12 of you producing, 13 producing multitudes of 3. This is a summation of those. Your individual votes would be available. So it says voting is closed. I'm going to keep it open because there's only 14 of you have so far decided. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so just to give a think about it. I think it's interesting to think about the pedagogies of the home in the context of COVID-19. And certainly in the school sector, I think this is where we have some sectorial difference, because
Simon, you cut out again.
Yeah, no, sorry. No, I think it was, I stopped pausing actually. I paused. Okay. I made the mistake of reading the chat. Sorry, I was just slightly distracted. So we've got hybrid models as being somewhat impactful, and pedagogy of autonomy being somewhat impactful, less so than pedagogies of home. Medium effort, let's call it medium effort. You may find as you go on, as you respond, that you find yourself wanting to be slightly more extreme in your responses, rather than assuming that everything is sort of going to be medium effort and so on. Right, so I mean, that's interesting. Thank you very much. I want to just talk to the fact that I suspect that the hybrid models of learning delivery are very much now becoming very much the norm. It's not uncommon to have institutions pitching things as being some form of blended learning. Arguably, everything has always been blended for a very long time. It's a question of degree. I think autonomy, although it suits the capable students, it sometimes increases the gaps in achievement, and the amount of student support that's required to enable true autonomy of learning is actually usually beyond the scope of what you might call mass providers. And I think home-based learning, again, assumes a degree of capacity from parents and guardians. With the depth and range of a curriculum, anyone who has experienced homeschooling will tell you it's very hard to cover the entire curriculum in a home-based situation. And I think home-based innovation is a fine thing, but again, it will rely on providers to support parents as well as students. So that particular that particular slide obviously is me summarizing those 3. I'm going to do that with the next 3 as well. So skills-orientated curriculum designs, those 2 that I selected, dual learning scenarios and pedagogies of micro-credentials, very much in the realm of work-based learning. So I would hope that those of you that work with people in the workplace would have some insights into whether or not this is practical, whether it's impactful, and indeed how much effort is required. So again, I would invite you to post your responses.
Simon, we do have a question in the chat while people are deciding on their votes.
Sorry, yeah.
From Maggie, are autonomy with independence being conflated? It can work well for all students if understood not as independence.
Yeah, do you want to unpack that, Maggie? Can you turn your, can we unmute you?
Sure. I think there is a real history in the distance education, flexible learning literature of an understanding of autonomy being the same as independence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, particularly if you look at it from a motivational theory perspective, where it's not just about choice, it's about a whole lot of other things, where autonomy is seen as students, and being enabled to allow their needs and requirements to align with what their goals and values are. And that doesn't mean that they're doing that on their own. They're often doing it with others and in context with a teacher as well. And so I think, well, I know it can work well for all students, in fact, because the research tells us so. I think we need to move away from this idea that autonomy means that, and I'm not suggesting we're doing it at an extreme, but I think we really need to move away from this idea that it means that students are working with less structure or less support, because it doesn't necessarily need to be the case.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think the Open University report talks about the self-regulated learning strategies, is the language I think they've used, which is, as you say, does require support to implement those strategies, to negotiate those strategies. I think it does require a degree of sophistication on the part of the learner, doesn't it, to be able to negotiate their own sense of their own autonomy.
Well, I mean, these ideas of autonomy are implemented at primary school level, so I'm not sure that they necessarily have to have that kind of meta sense of their own abilities to learn. I certainly think there's a process through which they learn to understand that, but I'm not sure that they necessarily have to have that in order to be able to express autonomy or feel autonomous in their learning.
Okay, no, that's a very interesting point. Thank you for that. I can see Gloria has also added something. Autonomous as part of a continuum progression. Yeah, I don't disagree. All right, thank you for that. Let's whisk on with the next two. We've got two of these. I'm not going to dwell on my comments because your comments are obviously more pertinent than mine. Essentially, we're just talking about work-based approaches being around for a long time. I think the challenge is integrating some of these experiences, which is under the banner of dual learning scenarios. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have with micro-credentials is all around verifying assessment approaches. If you have very small units of learning, there's a question sometimes raised as to what in fact you're actually assessing. So then we've got the leveraging of non-formal and informal learning, which is essentially watch parties versus influencer-led education. What do you think? Where do you think the effort is to implement those kinds of strategies within your existing practice? And would it have significant impact? What's the impact of having students leveraging influencer-led education, and how would you build that in if you were to try and build that into a formal program, given that these would be voices outside of your own organization, perhaps? For those of you that haven't read the report, by influencer-led education, we're talking really here about, as I say, the sort of the experts, sometimes self-appointed experts, some are certified experts. They may already hold doctorates and positions in institutions, but they're choosing to use social media to teach some particular aspect of their passion. Very often they are amateurs. There are a number of female scientists, for example, who are talking about what's going on in CERN, high energy physicists. I have an association with CERN, so I tend to watch what happens there. They're fascinating, incredibly articulate young women who are fantastic communicators. I'm learning a lot about high energy physics for no particular purpose, but it is not, we're not talking here about sort of social media people that are sort of doing makeup. Not that that's anything wrong with that, but we're not talking about kind of makeup type in social media posts. We're talking about people that are doing something that's more intellectual. All right, so we're being slightly cautious, aren't we? We're thinking most people seem to be thinking of these as all being vaguely mid-effort and mid-impact. Nothing seems to be standing out just yet. So, I mean, I think one of the dangers of the watch parties is there's the danger about, the sort of plonking people in front of the TV. I mean, as an undergraduate, I remember back in the 1980s being stuck in front of a TV that was rolled into the seminar room, and we had to sit there for 45 minutes and watch a video. That there is that danger, and it definitely does require some idea of frameworks built around it. And I think, again, influencer-led education, I would suggest part of the issue with that is it requires a degree of, I'm going to use that word, sophistication again, on the part of individuals to work out whether or not the voice actually does have some degree of credibility to it. But having done that, there is certainly some value within certain specialist areas, I suspect. Melissa's pointed out that there's some massive challenges with algorithms. That's absolutely true. I would encourage no one should ever linger for more than a nanosecond on a video on TikTok about flat earthers, or you will be bombarded with videos by the flat earth community. It seems like the algorithm seems to be deliberately trying to confuse the hell out of everyone. The earth is round, by the way, in case anyone has any doubts. So the last one is human-centered learning design. Pedagogies of discomfort, well-being education, walk and talk. Again, please, I invite you to vote. I'll come back to your comment, Gloria, later, or you can share that perhaps in the breakout group that we're coming up to in a moment. Pedagogy of discomfort, well-being education, walk and talk. Oh, that's interesting. Hugely important and not a great deal of effort. Oh, it's inching upwards. It's inching upwards. Let's give you another 10 seconds or so. We've had 9 people, still got 26 people in. So those of you that have arrived late, you can see at the top of the screen, it does have a voting system. Just go to menti.com and put that code in, and it will take you to the slide that's currently live on the screen. Walk and talk is an interesting concept with virtual learners as well. The idea about actually having people out and about, literally walking, but plugged in, or to have some audio to be able to participate in a kind of a some verbal conversation. I know there are a number of groups that use WhatsApp to do that kind of, have that kind of functionality, group talks and that kind of thing. There's nothing to say that you can't do that, but obviously it has to be built in with some pedagogic intent. And I'd be curious to know whether or not anyone's been doing that successfully. Okay, so give you 10 more seconds. Okay, thank you for that. Again, I think pedagogy of discomfort does make a lot of sense. We do tend to, the whole Meziro's transformative learning, we do tend to use failures to build on. That's a natural human process. But if as an institution, it would require some support to catch those people that don't react well to that discomfort. The whole mental health issue is obviously key for most institutions as well. Well-being education is very much around the challenge we've always had in education around teaching for effective and metacognitive outcomes. It's so much more easy to teach the cognitive outcomes, the so-called intellectual skills. It's harder to teach to the emotional facets of our learners. But clearly it is very much becoming more and more a priority for institutions. And again, I don't think walk and talk is necessarily just about campuses. It's not just about working, living or working around a particular physical reality. It may be when we start exploring things into the metaverse, things will become different again. But at the moment, I think we're talking really about giving people that sense of physical movement, even just standing within the classroom, walking around whilst learning. Podcasts are one of the clearest evidence that does work quite effectively for individuals. But it is important, I think, that we recognize that it can be harder to manage as an institutional level. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to encourage you, please, to go into your breakouts groups. And what we're trying something slightly different today. So I'm going to open some of the breakout rooms. You will be able to choose which group you want to join. So you haven't been allocated. So I would hope that you would all allocate yourself to one or other of these groups. There are only 3 and there are 26 participants. So there'll be relatively large groups, but I'm going to give you a good 15 minutes to talk amongst yourselves. The groups are universities and Te Pukenga, so the universities in the ITP sector, one group for private training providers, and one for compulsory education. If you find yourself in a room where there aren't enough, just join another one. We're not actually so many that we couldn't theoretically do this in a wider forum, but do remember that, you know, if you've got an opinion, you've got something you want to say, by all means say it, but do make sure that you give time for others to participate as well, please. There won't be any active feeding back. This is really an opportunity for you to decide whether or not you want to adopt any one of these particular strategies. If not, why not? And then when we come back at the end, we'll try and collate your individual responses into a collective response. Welcome back, everyone. I think everyone is back. We've lost 3 people. This is not so bad. Thank you for participating. I apologize that the groups ended up being much larger than anticipated. We didn't have anyone from the compulsory sector, so only one person who was willing to be reallocated, so thank you for that. You had a very large universities and Te Pukenga group. I hope you did get the opportunity to at least hear multiple voices. I could see Rob Nelson was talking at the end. Just a reminder, if you are more recently arrived, we're using menti.com. That's the code or the QR code. What I'd like to do is, given that you've had an opportunity perhaps to discuss now a little bit within your communities, what's workable, what's not going to workable, what's not going to work. And I suspect that you have identified 1 or 2 that seem to be very much in vogue and are current practice, or possibly, you know, nascent practice. So what I'd like you to do is to just, if you could provide some degree of ranking effectively, look at where your focus for innovation is going to be. And this is really about your personal focus, not your institutional focus. And let's see whether or not there's a particular focus that we as Flounds and Odler maybe want to pick up and work with you to develop some resources in that particular space. So this is a little bit more fiddly, I think, on a device, but I'll give you plenty of time to do it. You have a whole minute to do this. It shouldn't take more than a minute. Okay, I suspect we've probably got everyone that's going to vote has voted already. So thank you for that. No massive surprises, although I'm a little bit surprised that the sort of distribution of votes for things like watch parties and influencer-led education are as high as they are, really. Any responses to that? I mean, does that surprise you? Does anyone feel that something should be ranked higher than it actually is if this was to be taken across all of the sectors? Does anyone have a particular sense of surprise or intrigue? Melissa says she's surprised pedagogy of home isn't higher. Anyone sees the microphone? You've listened to me talk quite a lot already today. Anyone got a view? Right, it's not radio, but I never like dead air, so we'll move on. If no one has any particular observations to make, that's fine. The next one is for those that don't really like numbers and ranking and positioning things. This is an opportunity for you to think about whether there is a particular word or short phrase, but a couple of words that do that would describe your reaction to this particular set of innovative pedagogy. So not innovation per se, but these particular 10 concepts. What's your reaction to those? Just a couple of words, a word, if you can find a single word to do it, that would be great. You can add up to 5 words, but 1 or 2 would do. Few surprises. Presumably by few surprises, you mean there weren't very many surprises as opposed to there were a few surprises. Okay. I'm guessing that was Maggie. Was that Maggie?
How did I give myself away?
Well, I have known you for about 10 odd years, and I have tracked what you write. I read most of what you write. So, I know. I mean, I think it's an interesting spread. So thank you for that. I'm going to have to wrap that one up. So 17 of you responded out of 23. That's not bad. I think we don't necessarily have time for a formal question session using the tool, but I would just want to invite you, if you've got any final comments that you'd like to make verbally now, feel free. Is there anything anyone would like to share around this exercise? Otherwise, you will be able to download the responses, so you will be able to take them away if you're interested. We will draft a blog and post a blog report around this seminar. We'll list what the results were, and we will and the video will be edited, and that will also be posted on YouTube. So thank you very, very much for participating. Any final thoughts or observations that the Flans and Odler team can take this away and think about whether or not it will influence what we do with our professional pathways for the next couple of years? But other than that, any other thoughts or observations? Do I get the final word? So you're on that screen, which is why I keep looking over there. What's my next session? Oh, thank you, Pauline. Christina, what's the next Flan session?
Well, there might be one in October, but we are currently talking with somebody about that. And then in November, there will be the APOD week, also co-organized and facilitated with Odler and also ICDE. So we'll be posting more information as soon as we have that available. Great. So please do subscribe to the Flans Twitter.
All details will be on the Flans website. And do sign up to the Humanitix prompts as well. So if you go back to your Humanitix site, you can log on and you'll get notified of anything that pops up. Thank you very much for your time. I hope the breakout room was also interesting. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. I'll talk to Christina. We'll probably send out an email with a very quick evaluation form after the session sometime this afternoon. But thank you very much again for your attention. Thank you.